They disappeared without a word. No explanation, no apology, just silence. And now you're stuck, checking your phone, replaying every word, asking yourself, what went wrong? Why did they do that? You tell yourself you need closure. Just one final conversation, one last piece of the puzzle to make sense of it all. But here's the uncomfortable truth. That thing you're craving closure, it's not healing you. It's haunting you. Because the moment you start chasing closure, you stop facing reality. The moment you start needing answers from someone who's already shown they don't care enough to give them, you hand over your power. You delay your own healing, believing that peace lives in someone else's mouth. It doesn't. The idea of closure has been fed to you like a comforting myth. Movies love it. Therapists talk about it. Even your friends tell you, you just need closure. But look closer. What does closure actually mean? It's a fantasy. A neat, clean conclusion that wraps your pain in a bow and tells you it all made sense. But life doesn't work like that. Pain doesn't work like that. And people who hurt you rarely come back to clean up the mess they made. They're not interested in your peace. They were interested in control. And the second you start waiting for them to explain, to justify, to acknowledge what they did, you're trapped. You're stuck in a psychological waiting room, hoping the very person who wounded you will be the one to bring your relief. That's not closure. That's codependency wrapped in illusion. The mind craves closure not because it leads to peace, but because it hates uncertainty. Your brain is hardwired to finish stories, to make sense of chaos, to resolve open loops. That's why you can't stop thinking about it. That's why, even months later, a song, a smell, a name, they all send you spiraling back into the loop. You're trying to resolve the unresolved. But sometimes there is no resolution. Sometimes the story ends in the middle of a sentence, and all you're left with is a blank page and 1,000 questions. And that's what drives people mad. Not the pain of the breakup, not the betrayal, but the silence, the not knowing, the emotional cliffhanger. It becomes an obsession, a drug. And like any addiction, it promises relief while slowly poisoning you. Here's the sinister twist. That craving for closure, it's not even about them. It's about your inability to sit with discomfort. You don't want answers. You want relief from the anxiety that the unknown creates. You want control. You want to rewrite the past with an ending that feels fair. But life doesn't hand out fairness. And the people who vanish, who ghost, who leave you bleeding with no explanation, they aren't waiting to make things right. They've already moved on. It's you who's stuck in a room with echoes, trying to have a conversation with someone who isn't there anymore. You keep imagining what you would say, what they might say, how it could all make sense. But every time you do that, you reinforce the same belief, that peace lives in their hands, and that is the trap. Psychologically, the need for closure is a form of mental self-soothing. It's not wrong to want it, but it's dangerous to need it. Because when needing closure becomes your condition for moving on, you've given your past the power to govern your future. And this is where the suffering begins. You build your identity around a wound that never got stitched. You become the person who was left, betrayed, confused. You wear the pain like armor and call it truth. But pain isn't truth, it's only a signal. It's telling you to stop waiting, to stop giving them the power to explain what they had no right to do in the first place. Closure isn't real because they can't give it to you. Even if they sat down and told you everything, it still wouldn't erase the damage. You'd just have new details to obsess over, more fuel for the fire. The only real closure is the one you give yourself when you decide that you no longer need to understand, because your peace is more valuable than their explanation. And now, the cycle begins. You tell yourself you're over it, but then you hear something. A rumor, a song, you see a picture. Suddenly, the wound reopens, and your mind starts racing again. The Zeigarnik effect, it's not just a theory. It's a trapdoor in your psychology. It tells you to fix what's unfinished. And when it comes to relationships, especially toxic ones, that desire becomes a loop that never ends. You keep thinking that if you just knew the truth, you could finally move on. But in reality, that loop is feeding your anxiety. You're reliving the trauma over and over, creating a psychological cage of your own making. And here's the twist that most people never realize. That loop isn't created by love. It's created by confusion. by a deep emotional imbalance that demands balance. But instead of healing, you chase resolution. Instead of mourning, you seek logic. And in the process, you mistake emotional obsession for emotional depth. This is where dark psychology takes hold. The brain doesn't distinguish between something being urgent and something being important. If your mind is constantly chewing on the past, it starts to believe that closure is vital to survival, that the only way to stop the internal noise is to solve the puzzle. And this belief becomes your prison. It stops you from being present. It distorts your memory, your confidence, your sense of reality, and worse, it makes you vulnerable to manipulation. Because when you're desperate for answers, for validation, for a clean exit, you will tolerate mistreatment just to feel a moment of resolution. You'll reopen wounds by talking to the very person who hurt you. You'll chase ghosts, and you'll call it healing. But it's not healing, it's repetition. Pain repeated becomes identity. And that's what really keeps you stuck. You think you're looking for truth, but truth without peace is just another form of torment. Closure isn't a destination, it's a decision. And until you stop seeking it from those who shattered your trust, you'll never find the silence you're searching for. Because the silence isn't out there, it's within you. And it only begins when you choose to stop asking questions no one's going to answer. There's something deeply unsettling about how easily manipulators learn to weaponize your need for closure. It's not always obvious, but it's deliberate. They know exactly what they're doing when they disappear without warning, when they send mixed signals, when they keep the door slightly open but never fully walk back through it. You think they're just confused. You think they're struggling with their own emotions, but that's the trick. What they're actually doing is creating emotional dependency. By withholding a clear ending, they keep you in limbo, emotionally hooked, mentally fixated, psychologically stuck. It's a tactic, whether they're aware of it consciously or not. They know you'll crave understanding. They know you'll replay the story, hoping to fill in the blanks. And so, they offer you just enough to keep you there. A late-night message, a vague apology, a breadcrumb of attention. And you take it because you're starving for meaning, for closure, for resolution. But look at the pattern. Every time you get close to an answer, they pull back. Every time you try to cut contact, they reappear. Not with clarity, but with confusion. They never say what you need to hear, only what keeps you guessing. You think you're reconnecting. They're just reestablishing control. The uncertainty they create becomes the mechanism by which they dominate your mind. They don't need to physically be there anymore. You've become your own captor, replaying everything, analyzing every word, clinging to any sign that maybe, just maybe, they cared. But deep down, you know something is wrong. You know they're not offering healing. They're keeping the wound open on purpose. This is why people stay trapped in toxic dynamics. Not because of love, but because of the psychological trap built around closure. You believe that if you just have one more conversation, if they could just explain themselves, you could finally move on. But they know that, and they exploit it. They drag out the ending so that you never get to leave. They know your empathy will make excuses, that your trauma will crave repair, and so they become masters of ambiguity. 1 foot in, 1 foot out. One moment warm, the next cold. They don't resolve things, they recycle them. And each cycle reinforces the belief that you're close to closure. But you're not. You're caught in emotional warfare, and your need for answers is being used against you. It's brutal, because the more they manipulate your sense of finality, the more desperate you become to secure it. And in that desperation, you start betraying yourself. You reach out. You beg. You plead for honesty. You settle for crumbs and call it progress. But what's really happening is that your self-worth is being traded away piece by piece in exchange for a resolution that will never come. Because they never intended to give it to you. Closure would mean releasing you, and releasing you means losing control. So instead, they keep the story half-written, because as long as the ending is open, you're still part of their script. And the cruelest part is you think you're the one trying to fix things. But you're actually being played. Now comes the part no one tells you. You don't need their permission to end the story. You don't need them to validate your pain or explain their actions. You don't need to hear "I'm sorry" to begin healing. What you need is a radical shift in where you believe closure comes from. It's not out there. It's not in a final talk. or a message, or a confession. It's in your ability to grieve what was, accept what is, and walk away from what's broken even when the questions still burn. That's where real freedom starts. Not in having all the answers, but in no longer needing them. In reclaiming the power you gave away when you decided someone else had the key to your peace. The truth is, closure has always been an illusion. It was sold to you as a finish line, but it's actually a choice. The day you stop waiting for someone else to end your pain, that's the day you begin to heal. Not perfectly, not instantly, but authentically. The day you say, "I will not beg for clarity from someone who gave me confusion," is the day the grip loosens. Because closure doesn't come when they finally tell you the truth. It comes when you stop caring about their version of it, when you realize their silence is the answer, when you finally see that their inconsistency is the message, when you decide that your peace matters more than being right, more than being heard, more than being understood by the person who hurt you. And yes, that's a brutal pill to swallow, because part of you still wants it to make sense. You want the pain to have meaning. But sometimes, the only meaning you'll ever get is the wisdom you gain when you stop chasing people who left you bleeding. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is let the ending be messy, unanswered, unfinished. Because healing is not about wrapping it up with a bow. It's about standing in the ashes, saying, "This was hell and I'm walking away anyway." No grand explanation, no final closure scene, just the quiet, fierce decision to move forward. That is the true ending. That is where your story begins again.